Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
It is the Brad and John Show, and no, this is not a best of. No, there are not guest hosts coming in this week. It's actually Brad and John, which, if you listen to other radio stations, nobody is working. Right, John?
It's absolutely true. I just went to Armstrong and Getty to see when they're coming back, and they didn't make it clear when they're back, but I think they're still out this week.
Yeah, all our shows, and even our station, Armstrong and Getty, are on Christmas vacation leave. Then Eric Erickson is gone as well too. Armstrong and Getty is doing best ofs. Eric Erickson has guest hosts, and then the same situation with Mark Lee Van Camp and Robbins. They are not live. And do you know there's a reason for that? You know what the reason for that is in the radio business?
Because people are lazy.
Well, that's probably the real reason, but the reason that they are lazy and can get away with it is because of the fact that the rating service, Nielsen, does not rate from I think it's December 21st through January 2nd. There are no ratings. And the reason they do that is because of the fact that, let's say you're a Nielsen person and you're carrying that little PPM thing on your belt, and you go visit your kids in Sarasota, Florida, all of a sudden it's going to show that you are normally a St. Louis listener. You're listening to us or KMOX or ESPN 101, whatever the station is. And all of a sudden you're going to be listening to stations in Sarasota, and they're going to go, what's this?
Yeah. Imagine being a slave to Nielsen ratings, Brad. And think of how many years in the industry. I know it was different in the 70s and 80s and 90s and even 2000s, but imagine being a slave to that rating system in 2024.
Well, the Arbitron system was a slave. All the radio stations were a slave to that, and everybody played little games because that was the old diary method. We had 2 months. We had October, November, and then we had April, May. Those were the only two rating periods in the year that they actually did the ratings. And it was sort of crazy because of the fact that you do all these things. You do all sorts of stunts. You do all sorts of giveaways and contests and stuff like that. And then, I think it was with the October, November, those ratings typically didn't come out till sometime in January of the next year. And then the same thing with April, May book. Those ratings didn't come out till the summer, I think late June, early July. So it's and the whole thing was, see, there's a classic story about that. There's a lot of people that got fired over when they switched from the old diary method to the new PPM, and one of the guys was J.C. Corcoran.
Yeah, I remember you telling that. But I mean, what a flawed system. And how does somebody that's a radio executive look at that system and not identify the flaws in that?
Well, it's sort of like the master that you have to pay homage to because of the fact that what can you do about it? It's to the point where there's a lot of flaws with it, but you just have to sort of work around it. Anyway, normally this time in the morning we do the top three, and these are the top three stories that are on John Combest's website. What's his website? JohnCombest.com. John, common spelling, Combest. Put a .com on the end, and you'll end up on his page. And this is what John says are the top three stories in the state of Missouri.
So, Brad, you had a fantastic lead into the number 3 story from over the weekend, and we'll include Saturday, Sunday, and Monday as well. Our friend Tony Botello from Kansas City, who runs an outstanding blog called Tony'sKansasCity.com, has an exclusive story about public radio employees in Kansas City seeking to follow their comrades in St. Louis at St. Louis Public Radio and become unionized. So St. Louis Public Radio employees became the first media union, or the first unionized public radio employees in the state of Missouri. Earlier this year, they created the St. Louis Public Radio Guild. So reminiscent of the Lollipop Guild from The Wizard of Oz. So it's a unique example of St. Louis Public Radio, who, by the way, is a favorite punching bag of Brad and I, to set a standard for other public radio employees. So good for St. Louis Public Radio, I guess, and we'll see if Kansas City is able to follow in their footsteps. The number 2 story over the weekend is the nonprofit progressive organization called States Newsroom, which produces content that lands in the Missouri Independent and a number of newspapers throughout Missouri, had an interesting piece about solar power and how solar power can be used to power, quote, disadvantaged communities, unquote. Uniquely, this wasn't explored too much in the story, but I did a little bit of research on this. The state of Missouri is one of the states that has applied for a $250 million grant for a program called Solar for All, which would provide solar panels, solar equipment to historically disadvantaged communities. So this is all part of Biden's Inflation Reduction Act, had a huge piece of it. There's a $7 billion program for Solar for All to provide solar energy to historically disadvantaged communities. So that's quite something. And Missouri is yet another state, we have to say, that when there is, quote, free money out there, Missouri is going to go out and try to grab it. So this is obviously a huge deal for solar companies who are looking for new business, reliable money from the government. And the number one story is a piece that's in the Post-Dispatch today. You can find it at my website. And I'll also plug the fact that on my website, starting last week, I have a new workaround to get around the Post-Dispatch paywall. If you don't want to give your money to the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and subscription fees, just go to my website and I have a workaround to get around the paywall. The state is confronting a number of pop-up bootleg marijuana shops.
Really?
So they gave a story today in the Post-Dispatch of, I think it was High Ridge. Let me look. Let me take 1 second here. Yeah, I'm sorry. It was House Springs in Jefferson County at a Knights of Columbus Hall. There's essentially a swap meet where you can go and buy marijuana and marijuana paraphernalia. But there is a sign on the door that says no THC sales. So you're warned when you go in there. You better not buy anything that contains THC. And so people can go in there and you can buy your homegrown marijuana from unlicensed dealers, presumably at a steep discount to what you would pay at a dispensary. And the marijuana industry, the bigwigs in the marijuana industry, and also the state regulators are going bananas over this, because obviously it's taking away revenue from the companies that peddle marijuana legally, and also the state. So they're and also, to be fair, there are neighbors that are next to these weed swap meets that say, hey, we have kids playing in the neighborhood and everybody's driving through here high. Somebody needs to knock this off. Go do it somewhere else. So those are the top three stories today.
Interesting. Let's follow up on all three of those. First off, let's go with the Solar for All thing. You know, the what was it? They officially titled that bill with the Deficit Reduction Act, wasn't that what you said?
Inflation Reduction Act.
Okay. What a hoax. You know.
Yeah.
Now
yeah.
the even I've heard this actually on other stations, and I've heard this on KWMU. The environmentalists are actually trumpeting the fact that was the largest global climate change bill ever, but yet they called it the Inflation Reduction Act. You know how government is. You just are especially the feds. They love to do the acronyms. You know what I mean? Where they have they do the long name and it's code word today, or something like that.
Yeah.
But having some experience in solar energy, which I do have solar panels, and what people don't realize is a lot of houses can't get solar panels. I mean, it depends upon how much what your roof is, and more importantly, it depends upon how your house is oriented. I mean, if you have a house if you come in on the east side, the front door is on the east side, the back door is on the west side, and it's the typical, A-frame style roof, you can put solar panels on there, but it's not very efficient because of the fact that the panels have to look south.
Yeah.
And there's a specific angle that is the optimum angle that the solar panels have to be tilted. And and then not only that, some houses don't have enough roof. And if you get into like some, like in the city with some of the really small houses, even in like places like Webster Groves and Kirkwood, where you don't have like big monster McMansions, there's not enough roof for the solar panels that you need to run your home.
Yeah, but now, Brad. First of all, Brad, you're talking extremely rational here,
I'm sorry.
And that really that pops the balloon.
Shame on me.
Solar story.
Yeah.
The piece that I linked to on Saturday it's great storytelling because it tells the story of a 73-year-old woman in Houston, Texas, who's powered by a CPAP machine. And there was a big storm. And Brad, if she hadn't had the government come in and put solar panels in, she might not have had a CPAP that works. And instead, she said her and her neighbors had a party with snacks, popcorn, and a nighttime breakfast of bacon, eggs, and sausage, all because of solar power, Brad.
Well, okay.
And here you are with your facts about the way the solar panels face. You're bringing a lot of logic into this, Brad.
Can I tell you a problem with that story?
Yeah.
Most of the solar systems have been installed in the St. Louis area don't have batteries. So in other words,
so they can't store it.
Well, no, yeah, they literally only work during sunlight. I mean, literally, that's.
So they wouldn't work during a dark and dangerous power storm. On a dark and stormy night, they wouldn't work.
What you just said is they're doing this at night. She slept at night with her CPAP machine, and didn't she say that she had dinner at night with her friends, stuff like that? Okay, maybe she had the battery system, but most of the solar panels. I know a couple even commercial installations that do not have the battery backup. Now, essentially what happens is if you have a true off-grid solar operation, you have a big monstrous bank of batteries. And what happens is during the day, the solar panels do two things. They provide enough power to power your home, in real time, and also charge the batteries. And then at night, when the sun goes down and there is no energy coming out of the solar panels, you switch it. Well, automatically, you're essentially running on the batteries all the time. There's a battery bank, and everything goes with what they call an inverter. Because the problem with the solar panels is there's some inefficiency. This sounds like nerd stuff when I say this, but there's some inefficiency because the power generated by the solar panels is DC, direct current. And to run your home, you have to have AC, alternating current. And there's an inverter that goes in there, which changes the DC into AC. And by its very nature, inverters are not necessarily super efficient. In other words, if you put in, I'm just throwing out stupid numbers. If you put in 100 watts into the inverter DC, you may only get 70 watts AC out the other side, if you know what I'm saying. So
I feel like you're letting facts get in the way of a good story, Brad. You're going to get kicked out of the solar club any minute now.
See, but this is the problem it's like the thing we talked about with the electric cars. I mean, once again, great idea. And I'm a guy who has been fascinated by electric cars for like 30 years.
Yeah.
My middle son, Blake, who at the time was going to, he was in the Francis Howell School District, but he took a couple classes at Lewis and Clark Technical, which is a sort of cooperative. You know about this?
No, I'm not familiar with it. I mean, I've heard of it, but I'm not familiar with the co-op program.
It's a cooperative education program that all the St. Charles County school districts participate in, and it's like a tech school. So in other words, if you're in like Francis Howell or
we had that in the Hazelwood School District.
Right. Mm-hmm. You can elect to, but you don't necessarily have to go there full time. See, my son, it was sort of interesting. My son drove up there from his school and took a couple of the classes, and then drove back to his regular high school. So
that's really cool.
So
that's
anyway,
a great option. And you and I are simpatico on the idea of college versus actually learning real skills.
Right. And he went to this, and so he took an electronics class, an electricity and electronics class at St. Charles Community College, Lewis and Clark Tech School, whatever they call it. And I went to open house, and my son said, ask my teacher about his electric car. And one of the things that he was doing in class was he was teaching them, electricity and electronics and stuff like that, but also real world experience. He was showing them what he was doing in his garage at his home. He had pictures and video and stuff like that of his electric car. Now, the sad part of the story is the car caught fire, burnt down, and burnt his garage down and burnt part of his house down. But now maybe that's not so sad. Well, that was sad for him. But that's once again, that's one of the real world problems with the electric cars. And then there was a guy in Washington we had on the show several times, a retired dude who was into electric cars. He took a Porsche, an old Porsche, was I think like a 944 or a 914, if you know what those were. They were not your typical. They didn't look like the 911s, which are the classic Porsche style.
Right.
And he took out the engine and put in a big motor and batteries. He converted this himself, and he'd show up at the radio station, and it was cool because he took me for a ride, and I'm going like, God, this thing's so quiet. He did it himself. This is like a retirement project.
Yeah, that's amazing.
But the problem is that when you get rid of choice, in other words, when you go to the dealership right now, you can choose between, depending on what you buy. You can buy a V8, you can buy a V6, you can buy a 4-cylinder that's got turbo, you can buy a 4-cylinder with no turbo. You have a change, excuse me. But the problem is, choice. I'm sorry. The problem is, what the government wants to do is no choice. You have to buy electric. Matter of fact, did we talk about this last week about the Buick thing? Did I mention that to you?
No, you didn't.
Okay. Here's an interesting story. And maybe I heard this over the weekend. I was listening to a lot of different radio over the weekend because I did a little road trip. Buick has told all of its dealerships that they have to spend between $300,000 and $500,000 to make the dealership ready for the all-electric Buicks, which are coming in the next couple of years. Buick
install their own chargers, I guess.
Well, that and they have to have to retool the testing equipment. They have to have all this new test equipment, stuff like that. Okay, so they have told the dealerships it's going to cost and this is mandatory. This is not optional. If you want to be a Buick dealer, want to consider continue selling Buicks, you have to spend $300,000 to $500,000 to retrofit your dealership for charging stations and also for the mechanics and teaching and equipment and test equipment, stuff like that. There's probably, I think they said there's 2,200 Buick dealers. 1,000 of them said, we're out.
Wow.
And essentially that Buick offered them a buyout that if they didn't want to participate in this program, then the General Motors Corporation would essentially just pay them off to go away.
Wow.
And I'm going like, no, hold on a minute now. Because the interesting thing is in the St. Louis area, matter of fact, there's one out right there I think that's technically, I'm trying to think if that's, it's O'Fallon. Right on I-64, Highway 40. If you go west, just before you get to the Double D or the exit right there, there's a new Buick dealership on the North Service Road. It's a GMC Buick dealership. And it's a standalone GMC Buick. A lot of the places have GMC, Chevrolet, the smaller towns you go in and they sell everything. GMC, Chevrolet, Cadillac, that kind of stuff. But I don't, to the point where when half of the dealers say, hasta la vista, don't you sort of look at that and go like...
Well, but imagine, you know that the company doesn't make that decision without doing some kind of a focus group and polling. So they had to expect. I mean, they can't be surprised by that because no company is going to make that decision without doing some kind of focus group work on it.
Yeah, but if you're selling a new product, do you want... I mean, like, if that would be like... Let's pick an example of that. That would be like somebody that sells their own products. Think of an example, a store that like they sell their own. It's like it's a company.
Yeah, I get what you're saying, like a Tesla. Well, that's in the car. That's an example.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily I'm trying to think of a one like let's say Lane Bryant. That's the clothing store for women. Okay, if all of a sudden they decided that that they're going to close half their stores, the customers are going to go, okay, where do we go to get our Lane Bryant clothes?
Yeah.
Now, nowadays they can buy it online. I don't know. The whole thing.
I know what you're saying. Hey, maybe we'll talk about that. We're up against time.
Yeah, it's frustrating to me to see that the government is making decisions for people, and there are so many crazy. It's like, I live by the law of unintended consequences.
I know.
There are so many things that are going to happen when it goes. I'll give you a perfect example of what I did Sunday and yesterday. Let's talk about the next break. But I do want to talk about, I'll tell you what, let's talk about that in the third break. I'll talk about my trip in the third break. But next break, two of your other top stories, marijuana and public radio, okay?
Oh, yeah.
We'll do both of those. Okay, you're listening to The Brad and John Show. You can check our website out at bjshow.co. That's bjshow.co. We are on Egbert, EGGBURT. Check it out, egbert.com. He's the guy that owns the radio station. We are here because of him, and we are very thankful to Mr. Egbert. It is 7:21.